Hi. Last week should have been the happiest day of my life. It was my wedding day. Instead, it turned into a complete disaster, thanks to some of my own actions and the betrayal of the people I once considered closest to me. Now, I cannot help but wonder if I made the right choices. Honestly, I am still trying to process everything that happened. Here is the full story. About 6 years ago, I was dating this woman, Rachel. I thought she was my soulmate, the one I was meant to spend my life with. After nearly 2 years of dating, I was getting ready to propose. Rachel was everything I thought I wanted. Smart, beautiful, and someone who seemed to share my values. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. One day, while Rachel was in the shower, she asked me to check something on her phone. I swear, I had no intention of snooping. It was all just a coincidence. As I unlocked her phone, a text thread caught my eye. It was between her and my younger brother, Josh. At first, I thought it was just normal, light-hearted family chatter. But the more I scrolled, the more my stomach sank. Those texts were not innocent. Not by a long shot. They were talking about meeting up and how much they missed each other. It was clear as day, they were having an affair. The second Rachel stepped out of the bathroom, I confronted her. At first, she tried to play it off, claiming I was paranoid and imagining things. She even tried to make me feel like I was the problem. But when I showed her the messages, the tears started. She broke down and admitted everything. She and Josh had been seeing each other behind my back for months. I was shattered. I mean, these were the two people I trusted most in the world, and they had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Rachel begged for forgiveness, but there was no way I could look at her the same after that. I ended things with her right then and there. Josh, though? That was a whole different story. When I confronted him, he had the audacity to defend what he had done. He actually told me that he and Rachel could not help their feelings, and that they had fallen in love. As if that somehow made it okay. I told him I never wanted to see him again. To me, he was as good as dead. You would think my parents would support me in cutting him out, right? Wrong. While they said they were disappointed in Josh, they kept pushing me to forgive him. My dad gave me the usual lecture about family being the most important thing, while my mom cried and begged me to let it go. But I could not do it. To me, trust and loyalty are everything, and my family had shown me they did not value either. So, I walked away from all of them. I cut contact completely. It was not easy, but I knew I could not have people like that in my life. The next few years were tough. I threw myself into therapy to work through the trust issues that all of this left me with. I focused on my career, put in long hours at work, and slowly started to rebuild my life. Then, 2 years ago, I met Emma. She was unlike anyone I had ever known. She was kind, patient, and so understanding. I told her everything about my past and the mess with my family, and she never once judged me or tried to pressure me into reconnecting with them. She just accepted me for who I was. Eventually, I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. Proposing to Emma was the happiest moment of my life. I felt like I was finally getting the fresh start I deserved. When we started planning the wedding, I made it very clear that neither Josh nor my parents would be invited. They were no longer a part of my life, and I had no intention of letting them ruin this new chapter. But I did let my parents know about the wedding, not because I wanted them there, but because I figured they would find out eventually, and I wanted to avoid any surprises. Predictably, they tried to argue. My dad gave me yet another family speech, and my mom cried, but I stood my ground. They were not welcome. On the day of the wedding, everything was perfect. Emma looked breathtaking, and I felt like I was finally getting my happy ending. Our friends were there, smiling and supportive, and the ceremony was about to start. Then my best man, Mike, came rushing up to me, looking panicked. "Your parents are here," he said, his voice low. "And they brought your brother." My heart dropped into my stomach. Josh? Of all people, they brought him? And his wife? How dare they? I was furious. I sent Mike to tell them to leave, but they refused. My parents said they were staying, whether I liked it or not. Barely able to keep my anger in check, I called my dad. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" I snapped. "It is your wedding day," he said. Like that explained everything. "We are your family. We should be here." I could barely believe what I was hearing. I reminded him that they were not invited, especially not Josh. 6 years have passed, my dad said. Do you not think it is time to let bygones be bygones? Your brother is sorry for what he did. He is married now. His wife is pregnant. Can we not just be a family again? I could not believe their nerve. Did they honestly think that just showing up uninvited would magically fix everything? Get out, I said, my voice ice cold. All of you. Leave now, or I will have security throw you out. My dad tried to argue. Do not be so dramatic, he said. We are already here. Just let us stay for the ceremony, for your mother's sake. I was about to lose it completely when Emma came over. She had overheard part of the conversation and could see how upset I was. What is going on? She asked, her face full of concern. When Emma asked me what was going on, I explained everything, expecting her to be just as furious as I was. I thought she would demand they be thrown out right that second. But Emma, being the calm and rational person she always is, surprised me. She paused for a moment, clearly weighing her words, and said, "Let them stay for the ceremony. It is not worth making a scene and ruining our day. We do not have to talk to them, and they can leave right after." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she had just said. On one hand, I hated the idea. It felt like I was letting them win, letting them disrespect my boundaries without any real consequences. But on the other hand, I knew she was right. This was supposed to be our day, a celebration of our love, and I did not want my family's drama to overshadow that. After a few deep breaths, I reluctantly agreed, even though my gut told me it was a mistake. The ceremony went ahead as planned, and I focused all my energy on Emma, on her smile, on the vows we exchanged, on the promises we made to each other. For a brief moment, I managed to push the anger and betrayal to the back of my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not stop myself from glancing toward the back rows. There they were. My father, sitting stiff as a board with a forced grin plastered on his face. My mother, dabbing her eyes dramatically with a handkerchief. Josh, squirming uncomfortably like a kid caught stealing cookies. And his very pregnant wife, who looked equally uneasy. I kept my focus on Emma and the ceremony, though it felt like part of me was on autopilot. Afterward, as guests milled around, offering congratulations and sharing in our joy, I noticed my parents starting to make their way toward us. My heart clenched. I knew this would not end well. Luckily, Mike, my best man, had my back. He intercepted them before they could get too close and firmly reminded them of the deal. They were to leave immediately after the ceremony. I watched from a distance as a silent argument played out. My dad looking stern and immovable, my mom gesturing wildly, and Josh standing off to the side with his wife. After what felt like an eternity, they finally turned and started heading toward the exit. I let out a sigh of relief. The worst was over, or so I thought. The reception got underway, and it was everything we had hoped for. Good food, great music, and heartfelt speeches from our closest friends. Mike gave a particularly emotional toast, talking about our years of friendship and how happy he was to see me find someone as amazing as Emma. Other friends chimed in with their well wishes and funny anecdotes, and for a little while, it felt like everything was back on track. But then something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was the years of anger and pain bubbling to the surface. Whatever it was, I decided in that moment that I needed to say something. I stood up, glass in hand, and tapped it gently with my fork to get everyone's attention. The room went quiet as all eyes turned toward me. Even Emma looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. This was not part of the plan. I cleared my throat and said, "I just wanted to take a moment to say a few words." My voice was calm, but inside, a storm was brewing. I started slowly, addressing the crowd in general, but my words were aimed squarely at Josh. "I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate this special day with us," I said. "And there is one person in particular I would like to thank, even though he is not supposed to be here." A murmur rippled through the room. Those who knew about my past with Josh exchanged uneasy glances, while those who were unaware simply waited, curious. "My brother," I continued, my voice steady despite the fire building inside me. "If it were not for him, I might never have met Emma." I paused, taking a slow sip of champagne. From the corner of my eye, I saw Josh and my dad freeze in their tracks near the exit. Their faces were a mix of dread and hope, as if they were not sure whether I was about to forgive them or destroy them. 6 years ago, I said, my tone shifting, my brother did me a huge favor. He showed me exactly the kind of person he is by having an affair with my girlfriend. The room fell deathly silent. Emma's eyes widened in shock, and I could feel the tension thick in the air. But I could not stop. It was like a dam had burst, and years of pain and anger came flooding out. That betrayal taught me a lot. I went on, my voice growing sharper. It taught me that the people you trust the most can hurt you the worst. It taught me that family does not always mean loyalty or love. And most importantly, it set me on the path that led me to Emma. I turned to Emma then, and for a split second, I hesitated. Her eyes were full of worry, silently pleading with me to stop. But I was too far gone. So, thank you, Josh, I said, raising my glass. Thank you for showing me what true betrayal looks like. Thank you for proving that blood is not always thicker than water. And thank you for being such an epic screw-up that it forced me to become a better person. A person worthy of someone as incredible as Emma. I drained my glass and set it down with a firm clink. The silence that followed was deafening. Josh's wife looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time, her face a mask of disgust and disbelief. My parents looked like they had been slapped. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and my dad's face red with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Josh, meanwhile, stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. And Mom, Dad, I added, my voice cold as ice, thanks for showing up uninvited and bringing him along. It gave me the perfect opportunity to let everyone know exactly what kind of family I come from. With that, I sat down. The weight I had been carrying for years felt lighter, but it was quickly replaced by the heavy realization of what I had just done. Josh's wife practically yanked him out of the room, followed closely by my parents. My mom was crying openly, and my dad looked like he wanted to explode. The door closed behind them, and the silence lingered until Emma broke it. She signaled to the waitstaff and said, I think we could all use another drink. The room buzzed back to life, but the whispers were unmistakable. My name was on everyone's lips. Emma pulled me aside, her face a mix of disappointment and concern. Was that really necessary? She asked quietly. I sighed, the adrenaline leaving my body. I am sorry, I said. I could not hold it in anymore. As Emma and I stood off to the side, she squeezed my hand and sighed. I get it, she said gently, her voice calm despite the storm swirling inside me. I understand why you were upset. They had no right to show up like that and pretend everything is fine after all they have done. But this day was supposed to be about us, about our future, not your past. She was right, of course. She always is. In my anger, I had made the day about my family's betrayal instead of focusing on the love Emma and I were celebrating. For a moment, a pang of regret hit me. I wished I could take back my outburst, if only to spare her the tension it had brought to our special day. But even that regret was overshadowed by the relief of finally speaking my truth. I tried to shift the conversation to lighter topics, hoping to salvage what was left of the evening, but the damage had been done. I could feel it in the air. My outburst had cast a shadow over the event. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Guests kept approaching me, some offering quiet words of support, while others seemed visibly uncomfortable. I smiled and nodded my way through it all, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying everything I had said and done. It was not until later that night, when Emma and I were finally alone in our hotel room, that the weight of it all truly hit me. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. I am so sorry, I whispered. I ruined our wedding day. Emma sat down beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. You did not ruin it, she said softly. It was not perfect, but it was real, and that is what matters. Her words, as always, were like a balm to my wounded soul. I looked at her, marveling at her patience, her understanding. How did I get so lucky to find you? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. She smiled, her fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. I love you, she said simply, and I am on your side, always. Her expression grew more serious as she added, But you know what you did today. It is going to have consequences. Are you ready for that? I hesitated before nodding. I think so, I murmured. We will deal with whatever comes next together, right? She said. Always, I replied, leaning in to kiss her. Still, as I lay beside her that night, I could not help but wonder about the fallout. I had publicly humiliated my family, airing our dirty laundry for everyone to see. While I felt justified, after all, they had crashed our wedding. I also knew that my actions had set things in motion that I could not undo. Would my brother's marriage survive this? Would my parents ever speak to me again? And, most importantly, how would all of this affect Emma, who had been nothing but supportive through everything? As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself and to Emma that I would face whatever came next head-on. I would stop running from my past, stop letting my family's actions dictate my life. It was time to focus on our future. But the drama was far from over. In the days that followed, I found myself grappling with unexpected confrontations and surprises I never could have anticipated. A week after the wedding, just as I thought things might finally be settling down, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I picked it up without thinking, only to hear a trembling voice on the other end. "I know this is out of the blue," said a woman I recognized immediately as my brother's wife, Kelly, "but I need to talk to you. In person, if possible. There are things I need to know, and I think you are the only one who can give me honest answers." Her words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I could not speak, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what she wanted. Then it dawned on me. The wedding. My speech. The truth I had laid bare for everyone to hear. As soon as I hung up, I went to find Emma. She was in the home office, focused on some files. But the moment she saw my face, she knew something was wrong. I told her about Kelly's call, half expecting her to tell me to avoid the whole thing. But, as usual, Emma surprised me. "I think you should meet with her," she said after a moment of thought. "Really?" I asked, skeptical. Emma nodded. "We cannot change what has already happened. But Kelly is innocent in all of this. She is caught in a mess she did not create. Do not you think you owe her some closure if you can give it to her?" I sighed, knowing she was right. No matter how much I wanted to put the whole thing behind me, I could not ignore the fact that my actions at the wedding had likely turned Kelly's world upside down. And she was pregnant, for crying out loud. The stress of all this could not be good for her or the baby. Emma offered to come with me for support, and I was grateful. I called Kelly back and arranged to meet her the next day at a quiet cafe. When Kelly walked in, my heart sank. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red and puffy as though she had been crying. Her pregnancy was farther along than I had realized, and the sight of her in that state filled me with guilt. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly as she slid into the chair across from us. "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to know everything," Kelly said, her voice trembling. "What happened between your brother and your ex-girlfriend? When did it start? How long did it go on? I need to understand." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what I was about to say. "Okay," I said. "I will tell you everything." I walked her through the whole sordid story, how I had stumbled across the messages on Rachel's phone, how I had confronted both her and Josh, and how they had tried to justify their actions by claiming they had fallen in love. I told her about my parents' insistence that I forgive Josh and how, ultimately, I had cut ties with all of them. As I spoke, I kept a close eye on Kelly's expression. Her face remained composed, but her eyes betrayed the storm of emotions raging beneath the surface. I could see the tension in her face, the faint quiver of her bottom lip, and the way her hand instinctively rested on her pregnant belly as she processed everything I had just told her. For a long moment, my brother's wife, Sarah, said nothing. Then, in a soft, almost trembling voice, she asked, "Are you absolutely certain it was him?" "Yes," I said quietly, hating the words even as they left my mouth. "I am so sorry, but I am positive." She nodded slowly, her expression a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "He told me it was all a misunderstanding," she said finally, "that you were jealous of him because you were attracted to his girlfriend, and you could not handle the fact that she chose him over you. He said that was why you cut ties with the family." A wave of anger shot through me. Of course, Josh had lied to her. Why had I expected anything different? But even as the frustration built up inside me, I felt a twinge of pity for Sarah. She had believed his lies, had built a life with him, and was now carrying his child. I am so sorry, I repeated, at a loss for anything else to say. She shook her head, her voice trembling. You have nothing to apologize for. I do not know what to do. I am weeks away from having this baby. How can I stay with someone who might have done this? How can I trust him? My wife, Emma, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. Her voice was calm but firm. I do not have an easy answer for you, Sarah, but what I can tell you is that you are not alone. If you need help, any kind of help, we are here for you. Sarah's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Why? You barely know me. Emma smiled softly. Because it is the right thing to do. And no matter what has happened between the adults in this situation, that baby is family. Pride swelled in my chest as I nodded in agreement. Of course, Emma was right. My niece or nephew was innocent in all of this, and did not deserve to suffer because of the choices made by their parents. With a shaky voice and tears glistening in her eyes, Sarah said, "Thank you. I do not know what I am going to do yet, but it means so much to know that I have your support." We continued talking for a while, exchanging phone numbers and making tentative plans to stay in touch. Just as she was about to leave, Sarah paused and turned back to me with a serious expression. "I understand why you did what you did at the wedding," she said carefully. "I am not saying it was right, but I am grateful in a way. At least now I know the truth." Emma and I were quiet on the drive home, both lost in thought. It was not until we pulled into the driveway that Emma broke the silence. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. I let out a heavy sigh. I do not know. I feel awful for hurting her, but at the same time, I am relieved that the truth is finally out there. Is that wrong? She shook her head. No, it is human. This whole situation is messy and complicated. There are no clear-cut answers. She was right, of course, but I could not shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Now that Sarah knew the truth, what would she do with that knowledge? Would she confront Josh again? Leave him? And what about the baby? As we walked into the house, I turned to Emma and said, "Thank you for being there. I do not know how I would get through this without you." She smiled and kissed me softly. "Always," she said. "Remember, we are a team." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind refused to settle. I kept replaying the events of the past weeks, wondering how many more lives would be affected by the truth I had unleashed. After our initial meeting, Sarah contacted me again. Her voice was shaky and emotional as she said, "Can we meet again? I do not know who else to turn to, and I need someone to talk to." The next day, Emma and I met her at the same quiet cafe. When Sarah walked in, I was shocked by her appearance. She looked even more exhausted than before. Her skin pale, her eyes sunken with dark circles beneath them. It was clear the stress was taking a toll, especially given how far along she was in her pregnancy. As soon as she sat down, she began to speak. Her hands trembled as she clutched her coffee cup. "I confronted him," she said. "I asked him to be honest with me, and I told him everything you told me. I held my breath, hoping against hope that Josh had finally come clean. But deep down, I already knew the answer." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "He denied everything. He accused you of lying, said you have always been jealous of him, and that you were trying to ruin his life. He even suggested that you might have been the one having the affair and are just projecting it onto him." I felt a surge of fury rise up in my chest, but before I could say anything, Emma placed a calming hand on my arm, silently urging me to let Sarah finish. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at me. "I did not believe him," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted to, but he sounded rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. And when I asked for specifics, he got angry, really angry. He has never yelled at me like that before. That is when I knew you were telling the truth." Her words were a mix of relief and sorrow. On one hand, I was glad she trusted me, but on the other, my heart ached for her and the unborn child she was carrying. "What will you do now?" Emma asked softly. I watched Sarah's hand move instinctively to her belly, a gesture I had come to recognize as her way of grounding herself when she was overwhelmed. Her face was drawn, her eyes distant, and she spoke so softly it was almost a whisper. I do not know how I can stay with him, she said. I have been thinking about it constantly. I leaned forward slightly, trying to gauge her mood. Are you considering divorce? I asked, doing my best to sound objective. She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line, as if she were weighing the weight of her words. Then, with a slow nod, she said, I think I have to. Someone who can lie so easily to me, and to everyone else, is not someone I can trust. And I cannot raise a child in that kind of environment. What kind of example would that set for my baby? I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. As much as I despised the thought of my brother's marriage falling apart, I could not disagree with her reasoning. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and Josh had destroyed that for her. Emma, who had been quiet until now, spoke up in her usual calm and practical manner. Have you talked to a lawyer yet? She asked gently. Sarah shook her head, her expression shifting into one of hesitation. Not yet. I guess I needed to talk to you first. I wanted to make sure I was not overreacting before taking that step. You are not overreacting, I said firmly. What Josh did was a huge betrayal, and the fact that he is still lying about it now, that says everything about his character. Her eyes welled with tears, and she quickly wiped one away before it could fall. I know, she murmured. I never thought I would be in this position. Thinking about divorce while I am pregnant? It feels like the plot of a bad movie. Emma reached out and placed her hand over Sarah's, giving it a reassuring squeeze. You are not alone in this, she said softly. We are here for you, no matter what you decide to do. I nodded in agreement. Absolutely. And not just for you, but for your baby too. No matter what happens between you and Josh, that child is part of this family. And we will be here for both of you. For the next hour, we talked through Sarah's options. Emma encouraged her to speak with a lawyer to get a better understanding of her rights, especially regarding custody. I offered to help her find a therapist who could help her process her emotions and make decisions with a clear head. By the time our conversation was winding down, Sarah seemed calmer, more grounded. I think I know what I need to do, she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. I need to do what is best for me and my baby, even if it is not easy. We said our goodbyes with hugs and promises to keep in touch. As I watched her walk away, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief that the truth was finally out, pity for the pain Sarah was enduring, and a simmering anger at Josh for putting her in this position. On the drive home, Emma broke the silence that had settled between us. You know this is not over, right? She said, her voice measured. Once your parents and Josh find out she is considering a divorce, they are going to react. And they will probably blame you for this. I let out a long sigh, the weight of her words sinking in. I know, I admitted. But honestly, I am trying not to think about it right now. Emma gave me a knowing look. We need to be prepared, she said. Are you ready for that kind of backlash? I thought about it for a long moment, the implications swirling in my mind. Then I reached over and took her hand. We will face it together, right? She gave my hand a gentle squeeze and smiled. Always. Despite her reassurance, I could not shake the sense of foreboding that clung to me like a shadow. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt like we were standing on the edge of something monumental. My parents would not stay silent when they found out about Sarah's decision, and Josh? I could only imagine how he would react. Still, for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. With Emma by my side and the conviction that I was doing the right thing, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next. That night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts refused to quiet. I kept replaying everything that had happened, wondering how it would all unfold. Would Josh fight Sarah on the divorce? Would my parents take his side again? And what would happen to that innocent child caught in the middle of all this chaos? Despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear. I would not let the truth be buried again. Not this time. A month has passed since my last update, and everything has changed. The biggest news? Sarah has decided to file for divorce. She called me last week to tell me, her voice steady but laced with emotion. I have given it a lot of thought, she said. I have spoken to a therapist and a lawyer, and I have come to a decision. After everything that has happened, I cannot stay in this marriage. I felt a mix of emotions as she spoke, pride at her strength, concern for her future, and a lingering sadness for what she was losing. When I started to express my worries about how difficult it might be for her to raise a child on her own, she interrupted me. I know it will not be easy, she said, her voice firm, but I would rather do it alone than raise my baby in a home built on lies. Both of us deserve better than that. Her determination was palpable, and I could not help but admire her resolve. Sarah has since moved in with her parents, who are providing her with the support she needs as she prepares for the baby's arrival. She told me that Josh would be receiving the divorce papers soon, and I braced myself for the fallout. Sure enough, 2 days after that call, my father reached out to me for the first time since the wedding. His voice was strained, almost weary, as he said, "Son, we need to talk." "Your brother is?" "Your brother is in disarray," my father said, his voice strained and tired. "He claims you are responsible for everything, that you have been feeding his wife lies." I felt my temper begin to rise, but I held it in. "Dad," I said firmly, "those are not lies. You know exactly what he did. You have known all along." There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line before my father's voice returned, this time quieter, almost resigned. "You are right," he admitted. "I know what he did, and I know I should have handled things differently back then. So should your mother. We were wrong to push you to forgive him." I froze, stunned. In all these years, my parents had never once acknowledged their mistakes. It had always been me who was made to feel like the problem, the one who needed to let go, to move on, to keep the family intact. Hearing my father admit fault left me momentarily speechless. After a moment, he continued, his voice tinged with frustration and worry. "Your brother is not handling this well. He has been drinking a lot. He came to our house the other day and said you had ruined his life. He is spiraling, son. Your mother wants to call a family meeting to try to work everything out." He paused before adding, "Would you consider attending?" Conflicted, I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to slam the door on all of it, on the drama, on the family dynamics that had left scars I was still healing from. Another part, though, felt curious. I had assumed any chance for reconciliation had died years ago, buried under layers of bitterness and betrayal. "I will think about it," I said finally, trying to keep my tone neutral, "but I am not promising anything." When I hung up, I immediately sought out Emma and told her about the call. She listened closely, her expression calm but thoughtful. After I finished recounting the conversation, she looked at me and asked, "What are you going to do?" I shook my head, letting out a frustrated sigh. "I do not know. A part of me just wants to be done with all of it, to walk away for good. And the other part?" she pressed gently. I hesitated, then admitted, "The other part wants to go. Maybe I should go to this family meeting. I do not know why, but something about it feels unfinished." Emma surprised me with her response. "I think you should go," she said simply. I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Why?" "Because this has been hanging over you for 6 years," she said. "Maybe this is your chance to finally face it head-on and put it to rest. What if it just makes everything worse?" I asked, my voice betraying my hesitation. Emma reached out and took my hand. "Then at least you will know you tried," she said. "And no matter what happens, I will be right there with you." Her unwavering support made my decision easier, though it did not erase my doubts. So, here is where things stand. Sarah is moving forward with her divorce, Josh is spiraling, and I am seriously considering attending a family meeting that could either begin to mend old wounds or tear them wide open. I have no idea how this will play out. There is a part of me that is scared to face my family again, scared of reopening all the hurt and rage that have been festering for years. But there is another part of me, a hopeful part, that wonders if this could finally be a turning point. Hope feels like a dangerous word, but I cannot ignore the glimmer of possibility that maybe, just maybe, my family might find a way to be honest with each other for the first time in a long time. I know one thing for sure. Whatever happens, Emma will have my back. And as long as I stick to the truth, No matter how uncomfortable it might be, I know I will be doing the right thing. When the day of the family meeting arrived, I felt a heaviness settle over me. Emma and I drove in silence, the tension palpable in the air. She reached over and squeezed my hand as we pulled into my parents' driveway, her expression calm but reassuring. "You can do this," she said softly. "No matter what happens, I am right here with you." I nodded, swallowing hard. As much as I appreciated her support, I still felt like I was walking into a lion's den. The living room was already crowded when we walked in. My father sat in his favorite armchair, looking worn and older than I remembered. My mother was pacing near the fireplace, wringing her hands. Sarah was there too, seated on the couch with her hands protectively over her belly, her face pale but resolute. And then there was Josh, slouched in a chair in the corner, his face a mask of anger and defiance. "Thanks for coming," my father said, his voice tight. "We just want to clear the air and try to figure out how to move forward as a family." I glanced at Josh, whose jaw tightened visibly at my father's words. "Josh," my mother said gently, "why do you not start? Tell your brother how you feel." Josh let out a bitter laugh and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "How I feel? Really? You want me to tell him how I feel?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Fine. I feel like he has been trying to destroy my life since day one. First, he goes digging through Rachel's phone. She asked me to check something," I interrupted sharply. "I did not go looking for anything. I just found the truth." Josh shot me a venomous glare. "Truth? You mean your version of the truth? You were jealous, plain and simple. Rachel and I were in love, and you could not handle it. So, you blew everything up?" I felt my hands clench into fists, but before I could respond, Sarah spoke up. "Is that what you call love, Josh? Betraying your brother? Lying to everyone around you?" Her voice trembled, but there was steel in her words. Josh's face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and shrugged. "Fine. You want the truth? Here it is." The room went silent, every pair of eyes fixed on him. "Rachel and I weren't some fairy tale romance," he admitted. "It started as a fling, okay? She was bored. I was bored. And it just happened. We didn't plan to hurt anyone, but once it started, we couldn't stop. It wasn't love. It was stupid and selfish, and yeah, I screwed up." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I stared at him, my mind racing. After all these years of denial and deflection, he was finally admitting it. "But that's not all, is it?" Sarah said, her voice low but steady. "There is more, Josh. Isn't there?" His eyes flicked to her, and for a moment, he looked genuinely panicked. Then he laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You want the whole story? Fine. You deserve it, I guess." He ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of anger and exhaustion. "After Rachel, I thought I could clean up my act. Start fresh. And then I met you, Sarah. You were perfect. Too perfect for someone like me. But I wanted to be better for you." Sarah's hands tightened over her belly, her knuckles turning white. "But I couldn't do it," Josh continued, his voice breaking. "I cheated on you. More than once. And the worst part? It wasn't even about you. It was about me. I couldn't stop screwing things up, even when I had something good." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she didn't say a word. I could feel Emma's hand gripping mine, her support grounding me as the room seemed to spin around me. Josh turned his gaze to me, his eyes hollow. "So yeah, you want me to admit I'm the bad guy? Fine. I am. I ruined everything. I betrayed you. I lied to Sarah. And now, thanks to you, everyone knows what a screw-up I am. Happy?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "This isn't about being happy, Josh. It's about the truth. You've spent years lying to everyone around you, including yourself. It's time to own up to it." Josh let out a bitter laugh and stood up, his movements abrupt and jerky. "Own up to it? Great. Consider it owned." He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on each of us in turn. "But don't expect me to stick around for the fallout." "Josh," my father said, his voice heavy with desperation. "Wait. We can figure this out. You don't have to go." Josh shook his head, his expression unreadable. No, Dad. I do. I've done enough damage here. Without another word, he walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing through the house. The front door slammed shut behind him, and just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. My father stared at the floor, his face etched with regret. Sarah sat frozen, her tears falling silently. It was Emma who broke the silence. "This is hard," she said gently, "but sometimes facing the truth is the only way to heal." I nodded, though my chest felt tight. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not happiness, but a kind of peace. The truth was out, and the weight I had been carrying for so long felt a little lighter. That night, as Emma and I drove home, I thought about what Josh had said and the choice he had made. Maybe it was for the best. Maybe some wounds were too deep to mend. As we pulled into our driveway, Emma looked over at me and smiled softly. "You did the right thing," she said. I nodded, taking her hand in mine. "I know," I said quietly, "and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can finally move forward." Josh vanished after that day, cutting ties with the family completely. Rumors spread that he retreated to a remote cabin in the woods, living in isolation and drinking heavily to cope. No one heard from him again, and his absence became a lingering shadow over the family. While some wondered if he would ever return, most accepted that he was gone for good, leaving behind the wreckage of his choices. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you found out a family member betrayed you in such a way? If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.